Sounds weird.
Sounds nice, huh?
We know each other.
Hi. So I'm going to administer the oath, and I'm going to read it to you, and at the end you'll say you do, and I'm going to read each of your names into the record, just so we have that. So at the end I'll give you a little nod. If everyone could please stand and raise their right hand, please. The three new people.
The three new people.
Yes. You, Linnea Pena, Stephen Miller, and Michael Zagorczyk, do solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which you are about to enter.
I do.
Okay, and I will go ahead and have you each sign.
Thank you, everybody.
You didn't know you were signing up to defend the U.S. Constitution against foreign enemies, did you?
I know. That's always scary.
Can I give you my certificate?
Sure, that would be lovely.
I thought always surprises.
Oh, your ethics?
Like,
I know, wasn't that fun?
I didn't mind
It sounds like you're doing.
I guess I was.
That was kind of interesting. It just didn't need to be 2 hours long.
No.
Let me just say that in the picture, it looks like you're all pledging allegiance to Kim, because she's
Because she's sitting and everyone else
So
is
let me move.
honoring her.
Want me to move? And then stand up?
You could do one group shot, yeah.
Yeah, if you want a group shot.
Just a repose.
Yes, let's do a group shot, shall we?
It's not our official group.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Just the new. Is this
Just
for
for
the
the paper.
newspaper?
Where are we going with the group?
You can just go underneath the town of Yountville.
How I feel like.
Park that one day.
The group shot.
Under the town of Yountville.
Yes, how's that?
Wonderful.
Right side up?
Wonderful, yeah. Upside, yes, that's always good. All right, gang.
Great.
That's terrific. Yay. Big shoulders.
Big shoulders.
Thank you.
Oh, I am not. Thank you. Beautiful.
Well, now that you're committed, we'll tell you what you all committed to.
Okay, we can go live. He's watching. See that red light above the camera? When that light is on, we're live. So behave.
Here we go.
All right, welcome to the special meeting of the Zoning Design Review Board for Tuesday, August 14th. I will call the meeting to order. And a roll call?
When I say your name, just say here. Member Zagorczyk?
Here.
Member Miller? Here. Member Pena?
Here.
Vice Chair Tigret?
Here.
Chair Cook?
Here.
The records show everyone is here.
Thank you all for joining us, and I appreciate your coming and joining us, and welcome. I'll ask you to all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda? If not, could somebody make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Excellent. And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. Public comment for items not on the agenda. We do not have any public anymore, so we will close that. And we will move on to presentation and discussion.
Well, hello and welcome, new members. I'm happy to have you here, Lynn and Stephen and Michael. It's exciting to have some new faces, and having sat through your interviews, I know you'll all add something really valuable to this board. And welcome back, Mikkel and Kim. I think you're all serving on the ZDRB at a really exciting time. We are going through a comprehensive general plan update, which we anticipate adopting by end of year or early next year. And that's important because it hasn't been comprehensively updated since 1992. And there have been some significant changes in Yountville since then. We've seen more of the growth of the lodging industry. We've seen a lot of infill of a lot of the vacant residential land. And so while things have changed, what we've learned through the general plan process is that people really love Yountville for what it is and what makes it unique and special. And so we really want to preserve that. And we've carried that through with the general plan. I'm happy to share that we see the first draft of the general plan as of today, so it's making it real as we move forward, and it's going to have a lot of bearing on your service on the ZDRB because it will lead to changes in the zoning and design ordinances. You'll be involved in policy, and ultimately that'll affect development over the course of your terms on the ZDRB. But before I get into all of that, let me introduce us. I think you know us all, but I'm Sandra Liston, the Planning and Building Director. We have Steve Rogers, the Town Manager here. Nathan Steele is a Management Analyst in Planning, and Curtis Sawyer is a Planning Fellow, and we all work together on planning issues. Today we're going to structure it. Well, I'll give you an introduction on what guides your efforts here, and Steve will go into more of the procedural items that you may be less familiar with and have some questions. So let's go ahead and discuss, first of all, what some of the goals of planning are. And it's a lofty goal, but the desire is to create great spaces to live, work, and play in, to create a community where people feel comfortable and safe, and they just love it. And I think Yountville is such a community. And we guide the physical growth in the community through some of the things I've listed here. The first is the community's vision of the future, and we really see that in the general plan. How will land be used? That's a question that's addressed in the zoning ordinance. And what will development look like? We see that addressed in the design ordinances. So all of these items come together. And we're really looking at the physical characteristics of land, you know, buildings, what they look like, where they're placed, how open space relates to it, but also how buildings are used and making sure that uses are compatible with surrounding uses. Here in Yountville, that might be residential and commercial uses next to one another and trying to minimize impacts. So we'll start with this vision, and that is the general plan update that I just mentioned. And the general plan is the town's roadmap for the future. And it's really so helpful because it describes the community's long-term vision and sets goals, policies, and programs to manage growth, to direct land use decision-making, and to preserve the environment and the character of the community. It's really a high-level policy document, and while it certainly deals with land use, and that's probably what's most important to us here, it touches on all sorts of things, like the type of capital improvement projects Public Works will be involved with, and the type of parks and rec programming that we see in the community. So it's really a town-wide document. And what you see here are the 7 mandatory elements. And I do want to go in and just briefly describe each of these so you know how they all relate to one another, because after the general plan is updated, we'll want you to really become familiar with it and understand how the different policies in one area may affect another area. And so land use identifies the area in town that will be devoted to residential and commercial uses and buildings. It identifies areas for agriculture, open space, and public facilities. And it includes policies really that shape the way the town looks. So that's why it's important to the work you do here. The circulation element identifies the circulation network that people use to get around town by car and public transportation, bicycle and foot. It tries to address all those elements. And it contains policies that ensure a safe and efficient network and really to encourage other climate-friendly options. The conservation element identifies natural resources, species, and habitat. It identifies water and air quality and climate change, and its policies are geared at protecting each of these elements. Open space identifies open space that's used for parks and recreation, but also for agriculture and also for natural habitat. And again, it contains policies to preserve that open space and to preserve scenic views, something that we learned is important in the general plan. And it ensures that new development contributes to the development of parks and trails and provides access to parks and trails and preserves open space. The safety element identifies hazards and safety risks to the community. Those are earthquakes, fires, and floods. And it contains policies to ensure that buildings are built to the highest safety standards, really to reduce these risks and to prepare for emergencies. And lastly, the last mandatory element is the noise ordinance element, and it identifies the levels and sources of noise in the community. And it contains policies to protect residents and visitors from excessive noise and ensure that new development doesn't increase that level of noise to unacceptable levels. So we're looking at how all of those elements come into play with one another. When you're looking at a development, it may include all of the land use aspects, but maybe noise comes into play and we need an acoustical study. We may be looking at open space, and if we had land for a larger residential development, it would be to include parks and trails, and you can see how it all comes together. We have included 3 optional elements in the general plan based on concerns and interests of the community, and one of those is quality of life, and how do we maintain the high quality of life here in Yountville, and how do we find a balance between the needs and interests of residents and the business community. We've included historic preservation policies so that those are considerations in the decision-making process. And we've included an economic sustainability element, really, that identifies the tourism economy. So with that, we will soon have a brand new general plan that we'll all need to become familiar with, and it will affect the work here. What you will see is we will come back at end of year or early next year, and it'll be a long and ongoing process to update our zoning and design ordinances to make sure they're consistent with new general plan policies. And while I said we don't plan on changing a lot of the general plan, we are addressing areas for change. And since the last general plan was in '92, we've seen a lot of revisions to the zoning and design ordinance. So it's a great opportunity to make it more consistent and more just a whole document that works together. We can go here too. Let's switch over and just take a look at the Envision Yountville webpage. You may be interested in following the rest of this process before the general plan is updated, and you can go here to see where we're at in the process, the meetings and different workshops that are coming up, to view the project library and some of the existing general planner elements.
Can I hop in and just
Sure,
navigate
yeah.
through this? So this is more of a workshop. So rather than staff report and then formal public comment and then formal, if you guys have questions, just hop in and ask us questions. The Envision Yountville website, I know all of you have visited it many times nightly, but what I want to do is just walk it through so you understand a little bit what the Envision Yountville process is and the awesome resources that this website in particular is. So on this project timeline page, it kind of shows that the 3 phases of this effort. The first phase was the speaker series phase where we had all those initial meetings. And then phase 2 was all of the town advisory group meetings that we had with our workshops and the constant public feedback that was going on in that. And now we're in part 3. We're in Return of the Jedi, and where we're hoping to really finish this thing. And included in phase 3 is this little snapshot of upcoming events. And you'll see within it, we have the required by state law environmental impact report, scoping meetings, and everything associated with that important environmental study. Included also is some public open houses, presentations to the Arts Commission in November, to the Parks and Rec Advisory Commission in November, we'll also be talking about a review of the general plan with this body, with the ZDRB in November as well as in February. You're going to get 2 drafts that you're going to share your opinion on, which is important because the Zoning and Design Review Board lives in the general plan. And so it's very, very important to see.
Nathan, question. Isn't there an open house this Saturday?
There is not. That was a tentative date a few months ago.
Okay.
We talked about it, but it is October 13th.
So it was tentatively this weekend, but it's now officially been moved to October?
Yeah. So we'll send an email out to everyone that has signed up to receive Envision Yountville emails just to make sure they're sure of that. That was removed from the calendars a while ago, but for personal calendars, it might not have been updated. So we'll send an email out. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, that's good feedback.
One thing I think everyone will also be interested in, if you want to know more about the general plan, is this tab that says Project Library. There's a lot going on here that includes the agendas and the minutes from all the town advisory group meetings, videos of all of the workshops we've done, a workbook that summarizes everything that the general plan is and kind of the history of Yountville and how it's responded to the general plan. This is a really helpful workbook. We also have printed copies. Let me know if you want them. I have a few more copies in the back for you if you'd like. And we also have thumb drives if you want them digitally. There's a lot of available there. Previous versions of the general plan here, versions of the housing element and circulation element, which is updated, which are both updated a bit more regularly than the whole plan comprehensively. The speaker series videos, results of a town-wide survey we did in 2016 on a wide variety of issues. This right here is a really cool project library on how the community stands on everything. So just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. It's easy to remember, envisionyountville.com.
All right, so jumping back into the work we do here, more on a day-to-day level, the general plan establishes, the big policy, and it's the zoning map and the zoning and design ordinances that implement the general plan. And what you see here is the town's zoning map, and it divides the city into different land use designations. In a broad stroke, you see the yellow and tan blocks on the east side of the city. Those are mainly residential. You see the Old Town Historic District, which is the orange blocks laid out in the grid. That's the original development in town. And then the red and the purple zones to either side of Washington are the commercial zoning districts. You see agriculture shown in green and public facilities in blue. And it's important to continue to reference this project when we're looking at updating ordinances, but when you're looking at development projects to see what surrounding land uses are, how close a property may be to another district, to really understand in terms of how land uses are laid out, what are we looking at and what are the expectations based on proximity, maybe if you're closer to if you're a residential use that's in close proximity to commercial, or whether you're on the edge of town near the vineyard. Anyway, this map establishes those land use designations. It is the zoning and design ordinances that regulate the types and the design of activities and buildings that can be accommodated on any piece of land. And the zoning ordinance lists the different allowable uses in the districts. When we're talking about residential uses in many of the districts, single-family residential and Old Town Historic, single-family residences and accessory dwelling units, all of those are permitted outright as uses, and you only need design review approval. When we're looking at commercial districts, there are far fewer uses that are permitted outright. It may be an office use that is permitted, but if it's a use that involves food or wine or lodging, all of those need conditional use permit approval, and that goes before the town council. And then the the design ordinance establishes development standards. We're looking at things like building height and setback and lot coverage, open space, parking, signage, and landscaping. And all of this speaks to how land is developed, where buildings are placed, like I mentioned before. And so we'll be using this. And the zoning ordinance also establishes the procedures for permits. It identifies that the ZDRB sits in a decision-making capacity for residential projects. So you'll see applications for the redevelopment of parcels in the Old Town Historic District. You'll see applications for major residential remodels throughout town, and that'll come before you, and you'll make the decision. You may, and then for commercial projects such as this one here, you sit in an advisory capacity, and you'll be reviewing projects and critically reviewing them and providing suggestions to developers and applicants, hopefully for changes to projects to make them better, and ultimately making recommendations to the town council, and the town council will make the decision. I'm sharing here some of the plans for a recently approved and completed project. It's a remodel for Vintage House. And you see here a site plan, and a site plan has the building footprint, and it has parking and circulation for cars, and it has pedestrian circulation, has landscaping and lighting, and we're looking at all aspects of development in that way. Applicants will submit elevations and or renderings. You see a rendering here showing before and after, so that we can evaluate the project and for its consistency with the zoning and design ordinances. And then in the end, we get a project that was approved and built and finished. So that's sort of the nice part at the end. So in a nutshell, that's what we're looking at. The general plan that we really want to become familiar with, because it's a broader level policy. It's becoming more familiar with the zoning and design ordinances as to what those specifics are. I did want to hop to and just give you a quick orientation of the municipal code. It's at townofyountville.com. We used to hand out, this is the entire code. It's Title 17 that is zoning, and Title 18 that are the design standards. We used to provide those in hard copy format, and we're still happy to do that if you'd like. They're so much easier to look online, and you can click between the different sections. So let's click into Title 17 zoning. You'll see all the different zoning districts listed here, from agricultural to planned development. It'll identify the uses that are allowed. We have the overlay districts that would apply additional requirements and standards on projects. And then we address parking and landscaping and trees and affordable housing, and so all sorts of things. So when staff evaluates a project, we'll make reference to the different sections so that you might want to go back and read them yourself for the language, and use that as a way to evaluate projects. Let's jump out of this and go into the design ordinance, which establishes more the design standards. This is clunky, and it's hard to get around. I mostly go to Division 2, Building Types and Architectural Standards, and that's where you'll probably find yourself most often, because it speaks of the different types of buildings and what the requirements are. So it'll just take a little use going back and forth.
So one thing that's in front of each of you is the staff report that was tied to that Vintage House remodel that Sandra just referenced. You aren't making a decision on it today, but that's just so you get an idea. The ZDRB already made a decision on that a while ago. But as you read it, you'll see that staff summarizes the project for you, at least as best as you can in text. Every time there's a staff report, there's also a package tied with it. That's going to be copies of those plans, copies of the renderings. In the staff report, we're always going to call out the sections of the code that are applicable to the project. So within the residential buildings, and it says for single-family houses, it says how big can they be? What is the FAR, that floor area ratio? You're going to see that called out in the staff report. So staff will be able to do that math for you, saying whether something complies. Every time there's a ZDRB meeting, and Steve is going to talk a little bit more about what meetings or how they're supposed to be run, you're going to have a public hearing where you look at these applications. Staff is going to give a summary of the written staff report. But anytime we're giving a verbal report, keep in mind it's just a summary. It's important to come to the meetings, having done the homework and reading the staff report ahead of time, because there's going to be details in there that's important for all of you to know that might only be, again, summarized in the verbal report.
I would also encourage before meetings to always visit the sites of a development. In a small town like Yountville, you think you know all of the projects, but to stand and understand what buildings are nearby, really what the parcel looks like, you just get a better sense of it. So the site visit is important, the reading and understanding the staff report, and then contact us before a meeting if you have any questions. We love to get a heads up if you're going to be raising those items on the dais, and we can share our thoughts back and forth on it. Especially for the members that are new, you might have more questions.
Well-
And then there are certainly, procedural items with communicating with staff and having Brown Act issues. So maybe now is a good time to just hand it over to
Just
Steve.
one more thing before we do. Regarding questions, I want to just give extra emphasis on the asking questions beforehand. We're going to be publishing agendas, usually the Thursday, sometimes the Friday the week before. So you have the weekend to review them. Ask us questions on that Monday. Call us, email us, because some of the questions might take a little research on our parts, especially if you say, hey, in the future, have we ever approved a home with so-and-so, blah, blah, blah? On the spot in the meeting, we might be able to give some okay answers, but if you give us the time to do the research, we can provide you with the findings of that meeting whenever there were previous approvals. We can provide you with more context. And so if you're asking for questions, you'll get a better answer if you can get it to us
And I'll
in
just
an email
add to that
beforehand.
also, if you don't understand something or you think there's something missing, that's good feedback, because a standard practice is going to be, if a commissioner is asking for more information or detailed stuff, it's generally going to be shared with all of you. So you just need to be aware of that. That's just kind of a staff expectation that information is shared. If you've got a quick question or a background, that's not the type of stuff. But if something's saying, hey, what about this? We're going to make sure that you all have the same information, because it's important that you're making the decisions based on that.
And lastly, we looked at the municipal code. Go to townofyountville.com, and there's 6 magic squares right here. One of them says municipal code. That's all you need to do. You're right there, and then you're at that digital thing that we showed you before. Super easy to get to.
I had a question about the staff report. Is, in every instance, after the staff report is generated, is it essentially you've done the work and you're basically recommending it? You're saying we're okay with this, and the ZDRB is validating and checking it, or are there sometimes open items that have not been decided on that need to get discussed at the ZDRB?
Most often, we have a recommendation of approval when we believe all issues have been addressed. Where they're not, it may be more of a policy decision, although that's more for the town council. And there may be undecided issues that we are seeking feedback and comment on. There may be items that a commercial developer is pushing and that you will find in front of you, and they're really trying to get it through, and staff will raise a question, and it's really that time we want to get some feedback for that applicant to make a change before it goes to council. So we try to flag those and make those really clear.
And staff also works with developers, whether it be residential or commercial. They'll submit an application, and we'll usually say, hey, if there's an issue that doesn't comply, we'll circle it for them and say, you can't really get our support until you fix this to make it sure it complies with the code. And more often than not, they'll send in revisions. Every once in a while, there might be an exception or a variance that an applicant is requesting, and that's when the ZDRB would talk about that as well.
You are in a quasi-judicial role, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, some of your decisions have to be based on findings. So this is one of your roles is, you may not like something. That's not a legitimate basis for making your decision. So when staff goes through, they're going to be looking at findings. And now, some findings are easier to make, and that's why you go back and look at the rules and go, does this comply? And every once in a while, applicant will be pushing, and you could have a variance. So an area of a variance is where you guys are going to have a much greater role in whether that can move forward or not based on that. But I do want to reinforce, staff recommendations are staff recommendations. They are given with a lot of professional guidance and input, but at the end of the day, you're making the decision. Now, as a quasi-judicial body, there are also consequences to your decision. So in some cases, if an applicant feels that they've been inappropriately given consideration, they can appeal the decision or the matter can also go to a legal situation. So your role in some of those areas is very significant. So we will talk. We drew straws, and I got to talk about the administrative gunk stuff rather than all the exciting thing that actually brought you to today. So I'm going to be walking you through your binder. So I'm going to walk through some of it in a little more detail, and then I'm going to kind of point you to some of the others, encourage you to read it in a little more depth later. I'm not going to try to get through all of this in a half hour, but I'll point you to where some of the things are. First, I do want to point out we are incredibly excited as a staff about where we are with the ZDRB and the opportunities in front of you. Staff is really looking forward to including the ZDRB and the development of programs and policies. You know, we're already a year ahead thinking about what we're going to be doing with the general plan. So that's going to be an exciting opportunity for us to be using you all as an opportunity to look at and go, how does this fit? You know, this was the general plan. They said we need to go do this program, and we're going to start working on them. So you're going to be finding that in the next several years, you're going to be having more work, more opportunity, more projects than just evaluating applications. So we're very excited about that, but it's going to be a unique time. We've been including the ZDRB in policy discussion more, but I think this is really going to take it to a new level. So on behalf of the council, town staff, thank you for your service. I also say it's really appreciate the fact that all of you are here today for an orientation. For some of you, this is a little bit old school. We're getting better at putting stuff in a reference binder, but I will kind of walk through the manual here. One thing is California public meeting law isn't necessarily simple or easy, but it's guided with a couple basic principles, and that's, I think, what's important. Transparency and public access are general credences, and as such, there is a structure to how a lot of things, you know, I've had people go, well, you know, I want to talk about something, but I don't want to, you know, I don't want to, you know, can I do it off to the side? No, you can't. You can't have off the side conversations. You are going to be faced at some point in time, you know, you're probably going to know some of the people with applications. You may have strong feelings one way or the other that you need to go back to state law and the guidelines, but it's really all about transparency, conflict, and trying to make sure that good governance. So yes, you're going to be filing conflict of interest forms, and if you're doing a lot of business in town, you're going to be filing several extensions. Just for reference, staff has to also do all of that, and and the council, and there's different levels, but all of us are generally at the higher level, because part of the intent of the public is to make sure that you're not making decisions, we're not making decisions that are potentially going to benefit us. They need to be made for the public good. Just by background, the town has the Zoning Design Review Board. You're more of a regulatory approval body. We have the Arts Commission, which is both an advisory and a programming body, and the Parks and Recreation Advisory, which is more classic of an advisory body. The other two get involved a little bit more in programming, budget discussion, and services. You don't fall into those so much just from that standpoint, so they'll be working on that. But like I mentioned, you'll be much more involved in the program policy development as well as case. As you might imagine, your agenda is going to be very dependent on the projects and applications that come forward. California also has some very strict laws on, from a staff standpoint, we have to look at an application, comply with CEQA, various things, and we'll go into more detail with some of those later. But the general is, you know, once an application is submitted and deemed complete, we actually have a timeline that it needs to get before the public body, yourself and there, the council, because it's been deemed that, you know, we don't want something to belabor. So that's why on some of those cases, attendance at meetings is really important, because applicants are making decisions and people, everything's publicly noticed. So we send out our agendas. We are online. For a small agency, we have attempted to move really into a digital and online, but we will still give you things to hug, because every once in a while it's still good. But a lot of those stuff will be coming out electronically. You've already seen a brief orientation. The one thing that is really different about the ZDRB than our other bodies is you actually do make decisions that are final. Now, they can be appealed to the council, but a number of the residential and sign, you're making the final decision. And that's a little bit different than the other commissions I mentioned, which are, some of them have a scope that they work within, but that authority has been given to them by the council in a range. Similar here. One of the things that you'll be working on is we're working to bring you all into, for governance and email policy. You will all be getting shortly a town-issued email address, which you will need to use for your conduct on your public bodies, and we'll be issuing you business cards. The biggest reason on the email is Public Records Act. So the best way for us to protect you all long-term and to ensure that we comply with the state's requirement is if you're using a town-provided email, all of that will be on our server. So therefore, your private devices are not going to be subject to a Public Records Act request or stuff like that. So I just want to know, but so when you get into the scope of what you're doing, all of you will be transitioning to that. We're working on that, so that program will be rolling out shortly. Relations with the public. You're going to have them now. Not that you haven't had them before, but I think it's also important to realize that you're going to be recognized by some as a policymaker, an influence leader, and some people are going to approach you. You need to make sure that, again, in this case, Sandra mentioned, it's actually appropriate if you want to go out and talk to the applicant, look at the site. It's also important that you may need to disclose that in your commentary, but that's an important aspect. It's also important for you to be gathering that information. But again, I want to bring you back. You're a quasi-judicial. So if you are using your friend, the part-time attorney, as the basis for why you're going to vote against a project, you need to declare that, because the rest of you don't have benefit of your conversation with, I'm going to pick on Kim's part-time. I mean, you need to be making decisions based on the information that was presented. And that's really critical. And that's a unique aspect of your role. You have a staff body. Staff is liaisons, provide administrative support, advice. I really do want to encourage you, if you have questions, concerns, don't quite understand something, we would prefer you ask us. Call us, email, so that our job is to support as much as we can. There may be some differences of opinion on something, but our job is to give you the information to let you make the decisions necessary. All right. The town attorney is also, I'm on page 6 if you kind of want to follow along. You will not see the town attorney at ZDRB meetings too often unless we have reason to believe that the issue is going to be germane and needs to be explained, and most of the cases will be prepared. You will see me occasionally. I will not be at all ZDRB. There's a myth I cannot make every function in every meeting that the town has, so I just will. I make a good number, but I will not. Your attendance is critical, and again, that's because outcomes, decisions, timings. Imagine how you'd all feel if a decision was continually delayed because somebody wasn't there, or we need more information, because without identifying what more you need, how does staff go get you that? So I just want you, now that doesn't mean that an occasional delay or a continuance isn't appropriate, because maybe there's something that in the course of the discussion, there's several of you that are going, this has merit, but I can't support it the way the current package is. So if the applicant's willing to work on the package and revise it, then that's a great example of when there might be opportunities. Ethics training. Again, California will require, and you will need to take a timed 2-hour ethics course on a regular basis. We will be getting that scheduled for you. Again, all of our employees in the council are also similarly required to do this. Meetings. So there are generally 3 categories of meeting: regular, adjourned regular, and special. I'm going to do my best to try to explain it to you. Regular is your standard meeting time as identified by the municipal code or the charter for the body. So that would be your standard 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock start. So for example, today is a special meeting because it's a start at 4 o'clock. And then an adjourned regular meeting could be one where the meeting is continued and adjourned to that date. So not terribly complex, but you will have special meetings. Again, Nathan and Sandra went through the fact that we're required to post agendas. We exceed, and it's a commitment of our organization to exceed the 72-hour notice. There are a number of agencies that still struggle to barely meet it. In most cases, your agenda packets will be out on Thursday, on a rare occasion, Friday. And that's also true for those of you that are following the council agenda packets. All right. The conduct of meetings, we have public meetings, Brown Act. So the Brown Act requires that all meetings are open to the public. 72-hour must notice, 24-hour notice is given for a special meeting. Yountville is unique in the sense that we don't have a daily adjudicated newspaper. So we have 3 posting boards as well as the town council. So we post all of our agendas and then we provide information to the Yountville Sun. I'm not going to go into the great detail, but you've seen here the handout that talks about the format of how the staff report. So this is more typical of a council meeting. For those of you who followed, you'll see a consent calendar, a structure. You aren't going to have too many consent calendar items just based on the nature of what the Zoning Design Review Board does. But typically, in the order of business, what you're going to find is that chair will open the item, staff will give the report, and then you'll have a presentation from the applicant, and then you will open the meeting to public comment. Public hearings are fancy public comment. That's how I like to describe them. They're legally required fancy public comment because it just sets a time, says, and we do additional noticing. People trip over this in California, and the simplest thing I tell you is anything you have on the agenda, anything you do, is subject to the public coming up and giving you a few thoughts before you make your final decision. Now, with a public hearing, we do formally open it and formally close it, and you will be involved a little bit in that just because, and it is important to do that because in some cases, there, especially for appeal rights and things like that, if you didn't provide testimony and input during the public hearing, you may not have standing. So when we get into that, staff will help you on that. But again, for the most part, just recognize anything that's on your agenda and even things that aren't. That's why we use the initial, the opening public comment period is about anything. So if somebody comes up and wants to complain about something, even though it may not be within the purview of the ZDRB, well, we try to keep it, they can legally do that. And then we move into your agenda items. We use a chair system, so you will have a chair, and the chair will preside over the course of the meeting. And generally also the chair will not initially engage a whole lot in the discussion and debate, and we'll steer that to the other members and then generally wrap it up. Or that, not to mean that the chair doesn't get to have comments and contribute, but just the role is such to make sure, in a presiding role. And then again, typically staff will not overly interject when you get into your discussions and deliberations. So we'll talk early in presentation, we'll answer questions that you have. I do encourage staff, if they see an issue or struggling, then we may try to offer some insight or help, but for the most part, once the public hearing process is moved and you go into deliberations, it's the five of yours job to come up with or signal to staff that you may need some additional help or input. Chair, if you've got a large audience, you can say, given we want to hear from everybody, we probably need a 3 or a 5 minute speaker limit. It does not happen a lot in Yountville, and staff will give you a good indication if there's an item that may be necessary. Let's see. We've used the microphones, and I think it's also important, make sure they're on, because there's nothing more confusing to your friends and neighbors that are watching you when they can't hear you. So there's an on-off button, and just make sure. And I think it's also important to let the, from a decorum standpoint, let the chair know that you want to speak or have a question. So the chair will often be looking to see and call on somebody. But it's also really hard for everybody to, if 3 people are trying to talk at the same time, then generally we aren't going to get anything done. So that'll just be something for some of you, you'll adjust fairly quickly, I think. Motions. You do have the Rosenberg's Rule of Order, and I'm not going to go into great detail, but there are some perfunctory things. There needs to be a motion. Somebody has to support it. And if they don't, it fails. And then, assuming there's a second, then you go to vote on it. And there's a few little diatribes that can happen, but for the most part, that's where your focus is. And then you can have alternate motions or substitute. And sometimes those can be considered friendly. If somebody says, hey, you had talked about this condition and you didn't mention it, can we add it? And things like that. So, or if it gets too complicated, you can withdraw your motion and start over. But I'm just saying we don't get too hung up on that, but generally it's a motion. Clarify, staff will work with you to make sure they understand what's in the motion. Make sure all of you know what you're voting on, and then you vote on it. Conflict of interest. Now, this is one where we will be preparing, and I don't know that we've finished it yet, but you all have some limitations by statute of when you're deemed to have a conflict. And that is within, and I clarify, 300 or 500 feet?
300.
So if a project is within that 300-foot circle, oh, there they are.
This is 500.
It is 500?
Sorry, it's 500.
Okay. So you all thought, now you realize you do live in a bubble, because each of you have your own bubble.
This is your bubble.
So state law is very express that you are not able to participate in the discussion and need to recuse yourself from any activity on projects within those circles.
The only exception to that rule is if for some reason there's, let's say there's a property right next to Stephen's house and McKell's house, and it's in both of your circles, and Lynn happens to be out of town at that meeting. We need 3 people to make a decision. If there's 3 people that are unable to attend, we go to the highly complex process of drawing straws. And then let's say McKell gets it, and so Stephen recuses himself. Lynn is absent at the meeting. McKell says, I do live within this circle. The property is within my conflict of interest. However, I am going to attend in order to make a quorum. I just want it to be stated that I live in close proximity to this project. And then you can still proceed.
Question?
Yep.
If that was the case and the applicant said, I would rather wait, I would rather postpone the review of the project, my application, until a time when the members are present and the two could recluse themselves, do they have that right to do that?
We generally honor that.
The exception would be if it's been noticed for a public hearing and there are members of the public here, then we would open the meeting and accept public comment and close the meeting and continue it to a future date.
And that's your adjourned regular meeting comment where something can be continued we talked about. But generally, yes, we work with folks on that. I also say it's important. Abstentions are something that you really need not really to do. They're not helpful because they don't help make a decision and they count against the quorum. So it's just something, unless there's something really unique about it, I just encourage you, abstaining is not, it's in default actually a no vote, the way it can. The other thing on conflict of interest, this is the prescriptive one that's real simple for all of you. If by chance you have a financial investment, let's say you're a real estate investor and with somebody in town that owns a few rental units, and or something, we need to know those, or if you have a business relationship with somebody that's doing business even though it's not in the conflict bubble that was described, those trigger, you need to declare those. And that's where, again, we would encourage you to reach out to staff or myself, and we would advise you on whether that's, for example, if one of you have a business relationship with somebody, even though it, that may or may not, because what's deemed a conflict also has a time limit. So, for example, just because Lynn may have been involved in the escrow of a house 30 years ago does not mean she has a conflict. So but we need to know. If you have questions, those are the types of things to reach out to us.
Or if an applicant is a family member, that would put you in, you might not be looking at it in the same realm that you should.
Yep.
It's good to know those and probably recuse yourself.
But those are we only need to know those when an application comes forward, if you have
Correct.
that
That's
kind
why
of
those are all
relationship with someone.
situational, and there's, we don't pre-draw bubbles for all
No.
that.
No.
But just something for you to be thinking about, because again, that comes back to some of California's very strong transparency and why a lot of those forms. And I will just point out, there are consequences for people that end up finding that they've been violated. The Fair Political Practices Commission has fined public officials, including employees, planning commissions, EDRB, council. So the good news is you're not likely to make a mistake on running your campaign since you don't do that. But, and I would also say there's also consequences where if you participated in a decision and a vote that ultimately you were found that you shouldn't have, that actually can undo the whole action that the ZDRB has taken and require that process to be reheard, which also exposes the town to potential litigation or delay costs from an applicant or something like that. So biggest encouragement is if you have a question, please consult with us so that we can let you know. And ultimately, each of you, it's your own responsibility to determine if you have a conflict or not. We can't make that call for you.
Regarding the map that was included in the agenda packet, you all have a copy of it now. If you want me to email it again, I can. If there's something wrong with the map, if you say, hey, my circle isn't there, I live on the other side of town, for some reason, let us know. Or if there's another property that elsewhere in town you might have an interest in, tell us so we can update the map.
All right. How many of you are familiar with the reply all feature on your email? Okay. Reply all is not your friend, especially when you are a body. So if staff was to send you out something, or amongst yourselves, your communication, this comes to what's considered a quorum and a conflict. So 2 of you can have a conversation about something, 3 of you can't. And you also can't have serial conversations where you cleverly try to say, I think so-and-so might be okay with this, or what about this? I say this only because it happens, and especially in today's environment, easily disclosable. Most of us are not as clever as we think when it comes to deleting or removing electronic digital signals. So just something to be aware of, because again, it's really when you're talking about actions, for example, but reply all because if you signal something to staff, and staff will generally advise you if we're sending you something for information, we want you to be aware, don't reply all, just because it's potentially signaling all of you how you were going to vote. California also has a unique situation, which is a applicant can argue that you're biased because if you've already indicated how you're going to vote before the quasi-judicial process has occurred, then they have had their due process violated. And if you participate, that's going to also void that whole process. So again, another reason, if you want to participate in something, don't talk a whole lot about it in the quasi-judicial process outside of staff.
Yeah, that's said when he just said outside of staff. If you have questions for us, you're saying, oh, I don't know if I can support this project, I have issues with da-da-da-da-da, that's fine if you send it directly to us. It's okay for you to express concerns when you're asking us questions, absolutely. It's when you also copy the 4 other members of the board when it becomes an issue.
I'm just going to kind of give you a Reader's Digest version of a few of the appendix. So in the first appendix is a town organizational chart, which actually delineates almost every employee as well in terms of the organizational structure. You have a service delivery summary. These are just background information to give you a better understanding of the town and our service delivery model than you may have. We are what's known as a hybrid service delivery model. We provide some services directly with our own staff. We contract with other public agencies for certain things, but we're responsible and manage the outcome. A great example is the sheriff and fire. We also contract a little bit with the City of Napa Housing Authority for administration of our housing program. We have a unique relationship with the City of Rancho Cucamonga, which is in Southern California, that actually administers works with us on GIS technology. We also have joint powers authorities, which are public agencies that are cooperative. Some of the services are county provided, and we provide space. For example, the library is not a town library. All the staffing decisions and everything are all made by the County of Napa. There's the County Flood Control District. So you'll find some stuff in there. We also have a contract town attorney. We have contract town engineering support. In addition, we also have contract building inspection and plan check. So a variety of things. So I'll just, we are what's known as a council manager form of government. So the 5 council members are elected, provide policy direction, and they're responsible for 2 appointments. So one being myself as the manager, the second being the town attorney. And then I have the day-to-day responsibility for the organization of and delivery of the service delivery and all the employees. So the employees in the organization don't work directly for the council. So that's a structural. And then in this case, we've already talked about the council has, in this handout, we mentioned the Go Green Committee, so we'll update that, but that one's just completed its work. And then we also have appointments to a number of county-wide bodies. What makes those interesting is you're generally selected and recommended by the town of Yountville, selected by the council, but those bodies are run by the county or the Mosquito Abatement District, for example, so they're actually bodies of that body, not the town. So the town has, from elected officials, we have 4 council members. One of the council members is selected as vice mayor and a directly elected mayor. All of our seats serve 4-year terms, so 3 seats will be up 1 election cycle, which happens to be the current one. 2 will be up. A council term is a 2-year term, so it's when all 5, so there'll be a new 2-year term in 2020. There's an overview of the town manager's office, town clerk, Michelle, that you met. Town treasurer, finance kind of go together. By definition, we have a treasurer that Actually, we need to update that as well and make a note. Maria Ojeda is our finance director and treasurer. Sandra is planning and building. Nathan Curtis is management fellow. And then Public Works, as an overview, again, on Public Works, we have a number of things that we do in-house, and then major activities we contract out. Parks and Recreation, we have a very active programming component led by Samantha Holland, and they also provide support along with the town manager's office to the Arts Commission. Law enforcement is under contract to the sheriff, and we have a functional relationship, so I'll provide not telling them what to do, but service levels, expectations and stuff. And Sergeant is also a part of the town's management, so we have a very strong relationship, but a hand-in-glove one, because the decisions and operations, tactically and operationally, of the sheriffs are their responsibility. Fire and emergency medical response, we have a very cost-effective arrangement where the town, the Veterans Home, and the county share the fixed cost of Station 12, which is based in and identifies with Yountville. So that's a much more cost-effective shared service arrangement. You will also see a chart with your names. The next page is the board and committee commission member roster. Appendix C is the more thrilling Rosenberg's Rules of Order. So for those of you that really want to play parliamentarian, that's where you can get. We have an overview from the Institute for Local Government that goes into a little bit more detail, some of the conflict of interest elements. That way you can look at it. It talks about what's a financial interest, perception issues, fair decision, transparency. So some of the things, but it goes into more detail, and there's a nice checklist, so you'll be able to look at it. The next appendix is the Town Council's adopted strategic planning framework and mission statements for the organization. You'll see a community profile, some background from an economic standpoint, and the last component is the whole strategic plan framework, and then hot off the press is the fiscal year 2018-2019 expanded budget in brief. So you'll have an overview, and in the pocket is a handy dandy cheat sheet and reminder from the Institute of Local Government on sort of the ABCs of conducting open government laws in California, and kind of talking about what we have to do and posing some questions. And I think the other thing Sandra and I will be getting you, the Institute of Local Government also has a little planning commissioner's handbook workbook, and we'll get those for you. And it gives you a nice summary of some of the things, and some of the laws and structure just goes into a little more detail, and it'd probably be good for us to use that as a intro. But anyway,
You have a copy of that in your agenda packet,
Okay,
that document that's being referenced.
Perfect. I knew we had talked about it. So we've given you a lot of information. And even for those of you that, Mikkel and Kim, it's important, and that's why we really appreciate the two of you being here to welcome everybody. We don't necessarily expect that this has all been absorbed. So again, if you have questions,
That's why we recorded it.
triggers something, please feel comfortable to reach out to us, because we want your experience here to be the kind of experience that you want. You have all demonstrated a real excitement and passion for contributing and doing and helping to make sure that Yountville continues to be the unique community that we all treasure. So with that, I think we'll take questions that you might have, and we promised you a short first introductory meeting, and I don't want to be the cause of your being delayed.
Did anybody have any questions for Steve?
I just had a random question. It was, I think it relates to the Veterans Home. I know from having participated in the Envision Yountville process, the Veterans Home sits on state land, which is outside the zoning jurisdiction of the town. But, you know, how to what extent does the ZDRB overlap with anything that would happen that's Veterans Home related?
Well, not much. Now, I'm going to be honest with you because the Veterans Home property is in the town limits. There's one fuzzy little area under state law that projects that are not primarily of the benefit and the primary function of the Veterans Home can be subject to town purview. And that's still done on a case-by-case basis. So as an example, the golf course. You know, there's some things there, and again, it also depends. Sometimes the state will welcome our input. Sometimes the state really isn't interested in hearing what we have. So I can basically tell you we don't have jurisdiction. We continually to meet with them. There is a case. Now, most of those are probably going to end up being commercial. So again, the input would be more. Occasionally, we've been able to have a greater role if they're doing some master planning processes. And again, I'm fully anticipating that they're probably going to be launching a new master planning process and kind of punt on the one that they just did 4 or 5 years ago. Don't know that, it's just a sensing. But for the time being, really, the town will do a lot of communicating, and we can certainly share concerns, but I want to be really clear. You know, they can say, thank you, Steve, that was really nice, but, and we don't have, you know, we do not have, that's why when we tell you as staff, when people get excited about doing something up there, we have to be very cautious about the fact that we do not have land use discretion and authority. People may want us to, but we do not.
Yeah, I was looking at the community profile page. All this is very helpful, by the way. Thank you for putting it together. It was a lot of information, but it was structured in a sequential way where everything felt like it was in order, so I appreciate that. When I look at the community profile and the population count, because the Veterans Home is within the town limits, they are included in. Are they included in all of the demographics and the population? Okay,
Yes.
I was just curious.
Yes, we have a, technically our term is old and older
Yeah.
for our demographic. Sorry, Mikkel. But yes, and that brings up another interesting thing, just from kind of a fun curiosity from land use planning. We appear from a planning paradise world to be a fairly balanced community. We have 3,000 and some residents, and we have all these jobs until you start looking at the fact that our residents, for the most part, don't work. So we actually have, in planning parlance, what's known as a jobs imbalance, because most of the jobs in the town of Yountville, of which the Veterans Home is actually the largest employer with in the neighborhood of 900 employees, which a lot of people don't realize. So, you know, our employment base doesn't derive from the residents that live in proximity. There are a handful, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, we're very dependent across all levels of our employment. People are driving in. So that's a unique, you know, from a, when you look at it, it's a kind of a interesting factoid for Yountville.
Anybody else? Any questions? Okay. You have more? No? That wraps it up. Just one comment. I know when you send out the agenda, it's nice to have it electronically. You send it to us attached to an email. Personally, I like to have it printed because I make my notes all over it, and then when there's drawings, I can see them better. So are you going to ask people which the way they
Yeah, I'll
want
talk
it,
about
or-
that right now. Typically what I'll do is once the agenda is published, it's posted online, and I will send the agenda out to everyone like I did for this meeting. In that agenda, there's multiple hyperlinks. You click on them if you want to see the attachments or the staff report. Also, for the agendas, I'll always say, if you want the whole packet, some of the packet, or just selected things printed, tell me. and I can have them printed, and they'll be available for you. After a few meetings, I'll tend to know what y'all like, and we'll just get that ready for you. But especially as we're starting, let me know. Plans, nearly always, you're going to want printed. But just let us know.
Okay, good. Okay, if we're all done?
The only other thing I would say is if any of you thinking ahead about your business cards have a particular way or how you want your spelling and your email address, please let us know, because otherwise you're probably going to get your very legal name that you put on your conflict of interest, and if you want to go by something shorter, simpler, just let us know. So
If you want your title on the card to say town manager, let us know. Do that.
We'd want something bigger than that, actually.
Okay.
Overlord or Emperor.
Ruler of universe.
That's a good one.
Can I just get my initials, MT? MT instead of first name,
As
last
your
name?
email?
Yeah,
Like MT at Wyville?
yeah.
No, actually, I have bad news for you on that. It's going to be either the industry nomenclature is going to be that the town uses first initial, last name, or we're looking at, which is a growing trend towards first name, period, last name. So that part, once that's one of the decisions that is still being made. So that part's not, but if, I'll just say, if somebody, like I'll use Kimberly, she goes by Kim, so she may want, we can do that. Lynn, depending on, you may not want Linnea, you may want Lynn, so, but no, we don't let everybody pick their own, there's a nomenclature structure.
Just send you an email to that effect.
Yeah. Please.
Does make more sense when there's first initial, period, last name. It's more legible, just for what that's worth. Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything else? Then I will move to adjourn the meeting. In a second? Anybody want a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
That's it.
Thank you, staff.
Thanks, everyone. Welcome.